So let's continue what we're talking about with aggregate demand and aggregate supply and the long run aggregate supply. So with this model, basically just how we are looking at the economy and how it operates, we can look at growth, we can look at unemployment, and we can look at inflation. So in the diagram, we can see when there's a growth happening or if there's a recession. In the aggregate demand, aggregate supply diagram, the long-run economic growth due to productivity increases, this over time will be represented by gradual shifts to the right of the aggregate supply, right? You're more productive, you're making more production, so you're making more production, that is the supply, all right? And so that vertical line that we talked about, that long-run aggregate supply curve, this represents your potential GDP. Another way to say the potential GDP is the full employment level of GDP. Okay? So if we had a change in technology, if we had a change in the number of resources we have, right? So when we were talking about the shift in the long run, when we were having a change in these things here, this would be a gradual shift to the right over time as well. The aggregate demand and aggregate supply diagram illustrates recessions whenever the equilibrium level of real GDP is substantially below the potential. So basically here, when you're in a recession, remember that is where the real GDP is decreasing. And so you are not at your potential. Basically because of all of your technology, all of your labor force, and all of your resources that you're using, you should be here. But because of lack of demand, because of higher unemployment, because of maybe a change in the available resources, there is something going on to where you are not at your potential. So here is your potential GDP, and here's where you are. So you are below your potential. And when this is happening, we like to say that this is the recession. In years of resurgent economic growth, the equilibrium will be typically close to the potential GDP. It is possible to go past your potential. So let me illustrate what's really going on here. So when we are drawing these graphs, what you want to do is this. You want to have price level. You have your economy here. You need an aggregate demand curve. You need a short run aggregate supply curve. And then you need a long run aggregate supply curve. So in this graph right here, we can see that they're all coming to the same point. So this is what we would say is you are at your macroeconomic equilibrium. Another way to say this is that you are at your long run equilibrium. So your economy is currently at long run equilibrium. And that's because your long run aggregate supply curve is the same as your short run and the same as your aggregate demand. Right there, the green dot. They're all equal. Now, if we were to have a situation where we have a lot of people not wanting to work, we are having a decrease in the production of goods, there is something going on to where you are not producing at your potential. Because your potential is right here. On this line right here, this right here, YF. This is what we call your full employment output. wherever that long-run average supply curve, that is your potential. If we had a situation where we do the same thing, we have an aggregate demand curve, we have a short-run average supply curve, and then your long run is here. Okay, so this right here is your YF. Now, your short run equilibrium, another way to say the short run equilibrium is that is where you are today, or where you currently are. So you are currently at wherever the short run aggregate supply curve is equal to the aggregate demand. So that would be right here. So this is what we call Y star. So Y star is where you currently are at. And this right here would be the price level. So in this example here, your Y star is less than your potential GDP. So let's say I was your coach and I said you could potentially score 10 goals this game. Okay, but because you were lazy, you didn't want to practice that week, you didn't do any of the assignments, you really took it easy on the running, you did not score the 10 goals. So same thing happened here, right? Because of a situation with unemployment where people didn't want to work, they did not reach their potential. So that's what's happening here. You are below your potential. When this is happening, we like to call this one a recessionary gap. So this distance right here between your potential and where you are, this is the recessionary gap. Because you are below your potential. We could have a situation where you are above your potential. And that would look something like this. We would have price level, we would have output, we would have short run aggregate supply, we would have aggregate demand, and then we would have our long run over here. We would find our short run equilibrium, which is where our short run is equal to our aggregate demand, which happens right here. So this is our Y star, PL star. This is where you currently are at. This is your YF. So in this example here, this one is like I said, potentially you could score 10 goals. Okay, so given the amount of practice that you have, given your skills and everything, you could potentially score 10 goals. Now, let's say you had a really good game. You put in practice day and night. You perfected everything about your game. You worked well as a team. You did above and beyond. You pushed yourself to 120% in order to score 15 goals. So if you just did regular practice, you would be at 10. But because you did 120% on everything, you got to 15 goals during the game. So that's what's kind of happening with our country. So given the amount of resources and everything that we have, you are potentially at 10, like 10 cars. So given the total amount of labor force that you have and the amount of resources, you could produce 10 cars. However, if, let's say, your aggregate demand is wanting to buy 15 cars, so you're potentially able to make 10, but your aggregate demand wants 15. So what you need to do is you need to have your workers working day and night. You need to have your workers finding any available resource to make these extra cars. You need to maybe import some other goods so you can import some other resources to make the extra 5 cars. So that's what's happening here, is that you are past or beyond your potential GDP. This right here, this gap, is what we call the inflationary gap. An inflationary gap is where you are above your potential. Okay. So a recessionary gap is where you are below your potential. So looking at the long run, if you're to the left of that, you're below it. So that is the recessionary gap. If you're currently above the long run, so to the right of it, then you are in a inflationary gap. Okay. This is called the inflationary gap because if you're working day and night, you better get paid for day and night. You should get paid overtime. So your wages are really increasing. And since your wages are really increasing, it's going to cost more money. And then that's going to change the level of prices. And if you're having to buy more resources, that also increases prices. So because a lot more stuff is happening, this is going to cause inflation. So when you are above your potential, this is causing the inflationary gap. If everything is at equilibrium here, all right, so there's no right or left, everything's the same, you are at your macroeconomic equilibrium. So that's what we mean by, illustrating a recession where basically you are below your potential. We could have shifts happening. So for example, let's say we are in the recessionary gap. We could have a change in one of the consumption, investment, government expenditures, or net exports. We can have a change in one of these four things. And when this happens, this is going to change aggregate demand. Let's say, for instance, government were to spend more money. When the government spends more money, this increases aggregate demand. So let's say government spending increases because they're spending more money, and aggregate demand is C, I, G, and X. So G goes up, aggregate demand will also go up. So therefore, we're going to shift it to the right. And now, because the government spending increased, you are now at aggregate demand 2. So now this right here is your new equilibrium. So now you're at PL2, and now you are at your potential GDP. So when there's a recessionary gap, later on in the year, we're going to learn about how government can change this recessionary gap. But the main thing I really want you to understand is that when we are below the long run, we are in the recessionary gap. And when you are above it, you are in the inflationary gap. And we can move the aggregate demand around to get us to the equilibrium. We are also going to look at changes in the supply. That could also change the output that we're having. Okay? So in the next video, we'll talk more about unemployment and the aggregate supply curve. I'll see you there.